Hello, everybody, and welcome to this critical discussion surrounding the humanitarian aid efforts in Gaza and the intricate challenges faced amidst the total blockade and the brutal war that the Gaza Strip has been subjected to for the last 6 months, unfortunately. First of all, let me briefly introduce KinderUSA, a non-profit organization dedicated to providing essential assistance to Palestinian children and families in the West Bank, Gaza, and the Lebanese refugee camps. Amid the realities of this war, KinderUSA has surely emerged as a steadfast ally, working tirelessly to alleviate the sufferings of the Palestinian population in Gaza. Our panel, titled Humanitarian Aid in Gaza, Navigating Challenges During the Blockade, brings together three distinguished guests whose tireless efforts have significantly impacted the lives of the Palestinian population throughout the years. Firstly, allow me to introduce Dr. Laila Al-Marayati, with a deeply personal connection to Gaza, stemming from her familial roots in Khan Yunis. Dr. Al-Marayati's efforts include writing and speaking extensively on issues of concern to Muslim women, such as women's rights in Islam, reproductive health and sexuality, stereotyping, and violence against women. Dr. Al-Marayati serves as the chair of KinderUSA. Thank you very much, Dr. Al-Marayati, for being with us tonight.
Thank you, Ramona. Glad to be here. So I guess I will go ahead and get started as the chair of KinderUSA to talk about the work that we have been doing and the challenges that we've been experiencing. As Ramona mentioned, my family roots are in Khan Yunis. I'm the daughter of the late Dr. Sabri Al-Farah, who was born in Khan Yunis. We have many, many relatives there who have now been displaced, injured. At least 150 that we know have been killed over the past 6 months, including children, women, everyone. And I really want to acknowledge them and all the people of Gaza who are suffering right now and who have lost everything. So that's who we are dedicated to serving. And it's really important to just acknowledge and remember my own family members who are living a life they could have never imagined right now. For people who may not know, KinderUSA, which stands for Kids in Need of Development, Education, and Relief, has been in existence for over 20 years. Normally at this time, Ramadan, we would be involved with a Ramadan project, which supports local farmers who we provide seeds and materials and things that they need in order to grow produce, which we then purchase from them. And then using women's cooperatives in Gaza and the area, they would put together food baskets of fresh food, baked goods, jams, all kinds of things that are part of the Palestinian cuisine of Gaza, if you will, to distribute to the neediest families. And we've helped thousands and thousands of families over the years during Ramadan. Obviously, that is not what is happening right now, but I think it's just important to understand that's the kind of work that we do. All year long, we would have a hot breakfast, hot meal program for children in non-UNRWA schools. That is schools that are not sponsored by the UN. 20% of the population of Gaza are not eligible for the services provided by the UN. That includes my family members and others who are from Gaza. And so we would provide, through these women's cooperatives, hot breakfast and really sometimes the most nutritious meal those kids would have of the day for pre-K and kindergarten students. Mostly with our long-term partners from Beit Lahia in the north, our staff on the ground, as well as these women's groups that we partnered with. Other projects have included things related to clean drinking water in schools, playground equipment, school supplies, uniforms, and other support for children with special needs. But every few years, as all of you know, there would be attacks on Gaza, and we would shift our focus to a more urgent relief as in terms of the emergency that was happening in 2008, 2014, 2021. The current situation, though, is beyond catastrophic, with the damage to the entire infrastructure of Gaza. buildings, schools, hospitals, sewage treatment, water supply, farmland, roads, everything is gone. 75% is what the estimate is now. We know that Gaza is on the brink of famine, with more children suffering from malnutrition every day. This was always an endemic issue in Gaza. There were always levels of malnutrition among the poorest people in Gaza that we have been working on for decades to help alleviate. From the time of infancy and through to young childhood and into adolescence, you would see chronic anemia, stunted growth, other examples of malnutrition have been in Gaza for a long time. But now we're seeing this extreme sudden imposition of starvation on the population that is really hard to process. It's accelerated at a pace I don't think we could have imagined that. We're still a little bit in shock that this is happening at such a pace and with such intensity and ferocity against this population. Our staff have been under threat themselves, are among the displaced. Our partners have had some of their staff killed in the early days of this war. And yet they continue to provide services that I'll describe briefly for you, just so you understand the kind of work we're doing right now in this current situation. Mostly, obviously, we've been working in Rafah, northern Gaza, and we've been throughout Gaza, our team on the ground every day since October the 8th. And we have no plans of stopping, despite the challenges, the threats, what have you. This is something we're committed to. We may be a small organization, but our efforts are significant and meaningful to the people that we serve. And the reason we're able to be there is due first and foremost to the courage and bravery, commitment and compassion of our partners in Gaza. These are people who are out there every day, whether it's they slaughtered a cow to give meat, to give soup, to make stew, to provide for their own community at risk to themselves. We cannot underestimate the heroism of these individuals, men and women. So just to summarize some of the projects that are happening, not really projects, but basically it's getting food and water to people over the past 6 months. And just to give you the scale of what we have been doing, so starting in March, I mean, this has been going on, but I'll just sort of summarize from the last 2 months, distributing dates and waters, particularly to people in the north when it became clear that they were being cut off from all aid and assistance. This was in Jabalia camp in Beit Lahia to 1,800 families. We've distributed filtered water to families in sheltered schools and areas where people reside in the north, mainly Jabalia camp, to approximately over 7,000 families. Food parcels delivered to 200 families that included food we could find, our partners could find: sugar, cooking oil, honey, tahini, olive oil, za'atar, canned meat, etc. Then later on in March, we prepared food items and necessities based on the availability in every geographical area, particularly focusing on the north of the Strip, as well as Rafah in the south. And then more food parcels were delivered in the south with expanded items that we were able to purchase. And on the costs, as we know, have gone up significantly of fresh produce, but we used our funds to buy that food: tomatoes, potatoes, eggplant, lemon, malachia, onions, cucumbers, pasta, beans, and lentils, jam, feta cheese, tea, the essentials of a Palestinian diet, to distribute to over 200 families. More, again, to families, similar products to 180 families in the north of the Strip. And currently we're working on getting out more food parcels to families in the north and the south before the end of Eid. We usually would have some kind of celebratory events as well on Eid, which is coming in 2 weeks. And then we'll continue to work with the funds that we're able to raise. So people often ask, how are you able to get supplies? Well, we are able to provide funds to our team on the ground in Gaza, who then can obtain the food that is there to then distribute to families. Keeping in mind, some of these other organizations will say we're delivering millions of parcels to people on a daily basis, which you have large organizations there. But right now, there is no civil society. There's no infrastructure in Gaza. Imagine if your neighborhood, your city, all you could do was rely on non-governmental organizations to provide a meal today or maybe one tomorrow. There's always going to be people who aren't able to participate, who will be left out. Our goal has always been to find those people who slip through the cracks, who are on the margins. No matter what happens, how many millions of other food parcels are getting to everybody else, these are the people who still get nothing. And because of the team we've been working with for the last 10 years in Beit Lahia, they know that community and they know how to reach them. And so we rely on them and their knowledge. And the more we can reach, the more we can help. And you just have to remember that regardless of what all of the nonprofit groups are doing, even with the best of intentions, is still not going to meet the need of the people of Gaza in a sustainable way. There has to be an end to this. There has to be a permanent ceasefire, and there has to be an immediate effort on the part of the international community to rebuild Gaza and enable the people there to take care of themselves, which is what they really want to do. So that's what I just wanted to share with you. And then I will turn it over to my colleague, Dr. Jess. Hopefully Dr. Mads will be able to join us during this live chat. So, but for now, we will go on. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Al-Marayati. And we have seen that this war particularly did not spare anybody. And that, humanitarian aid workers, as you said, continued to carry out their mission, risking their own lives. So it is absolutely true. The adjective you used, heroic, is not rhetoric, is absolutely true. So as we were saying, Dr. Mads Gilbert is currently unavailable, but we really hope that he will be able to join us soon. And join us next is a member of the KinderUSA board, Dr. Jess Ghannam, a Palestinian-American psychologist and professor, renowned for his extensive contributions to medical development and humanitarian efforts in Gaza. As a clinical professor and chief of medical psychology at the University of California, San Francisco, Dr. Ghannam's work transcends borders, focusing on enhancing healthcare accessibility and mental health support for Gazans amidst the challenging socio-political landscape. Thank you very much, Dr. Ghannam, for being with us.
Romana, thank you so much for that kind introduction. And before I start, I just want to say something about my colleague and dear friend, Dr. Marayati, the president of KinderUSA and the leader of this amazing organization, which I'm so proud to be a board member of. And Laila, we are in deep grief of the loss that you've experienced with you and your family, and with the profound and deep and catastrophic losses that our communities in Gaza are experiencing right now. But there's so much appreciation that we have for your leadership at Kinder. And for those who are new to Kinder, we should really pay attention to what Dr. Laila has said, because we've been on the ground in Gaza for many, many years. We have deep connections and ties to the communities in Gaza. We are able to get food to Palestinians in Gaza, even in the north, which is being hit even more catastrophically than other parts of Gaza right now. So, hopefully by the end, you'll have a better idea of what's happening on the ground in Gaza, but what we can do, what we have done and will continue to do at Kinder. So I've been working in Gaza, specifically in the spaces of mental health, for over 25 years now. And I can say unequivocally that what is being leveled, what is being done, what is being engaged with to the children and the communities in Gaza right now in terms of the catastrophe, physically, emotionally, psychologically, is unlike anything we've seen in the modern era. Palestinian children in Gaza right now are being exposed to a kind of trauma that is unlike what children have experienced anywhere else on the planet in the modern era. And just to be clear, that even before October 7th, Palestinian children in Gaza had been exposed to a kind of trauma that was very extreme. So what we're seeing after October 7th is an acceleration of and a worsening of an already horrific context for children in Gaza. If you're a 16-year-old child in Gaza today, let's say, you've been exposed to now, as a 16-year-old child, you've been exposed to no less than 5 catastrophic wars that have been leveled on you, your family, and your community. In addition to that, Gaza has been under a total blockade and siege since 2005 by the Israeli military, which means that nothing, absolutely nothing, gets in or out of Gaza without strict control and monitoring by the Israeli military. That includes, from the sea, from the land, and from the air. So Gaza, as Dr. Marayati said, even before October 7th, had been experiencing extreme levels of food insecurity, as well as significant traumatic exposure for children. And some of the work that we've done in Gaza from a mental health standpoint, even before October 7th, Palestinian children, if you look at the population in its entirety, 80% of Palestinian children in Gaza had some symptoms of traumatic stress disorder. 80%. And that's even before October 7th. So when we look now at the ravages that have been put on the community in Gaza, especially on the children, we know that 14,000 children have been killed by this assault, by this genocide. And in addition to the 14,000 children that have been killed, we have tens of thousands of Palestinian children who are injured and who will be permanently injured for the rest of their life, who will be disabled in some kind of way. We're talking about a traumatic exposure that is unlike anything any child has ever experienced. And it's forcing us as a health community, worldwide health community, whether we're medical professionals or public health professionals or individuals who care about the health and well-being of children and adults in marginalized communities and communities facing violence. We're facing something that we have never seen. And in fact, it's forcing us to rethink entire concepts of traumatic stress. For example, when we talk about traumatic stress in the typical literature, we talk about PTSD. And for those of you that are not familiar with that, PTSD stands for post-traumatic stress disorder, right? And so what that means is that you're exposed to a traumatic event, and then that event stops. And then after time, you may or may not develop symptoms. Well, in the Palestinian context, especially for children, what we're bearing witness to and what we're seeing is that Palestinian children have never experienced the P part, the post part. Palestinian children have never experienced the post, which means that the trauma that they've endured, the trauma that they've experienced, the trauma that they're forced to bear witness to never ends. There's never a chance to catch their breath physically or emotionally, to get a little break from the trauma, to get a little break from the traumatic exposures that they're being put through on a daily and in some cases multiple times during the day. So what it is, it's forcing us to rethink the whole concept of traumatic stress disorder, because what Palestinian children are experiencing is not something that we've been able to evaluate or understand in traditional medical settings, because we've never seen this level of devastation being brought upon Palestinian children. It's a kind of traumatic exposure that unfortunately may take generations to fully heal, if it ever heals at all. And so when we look at the juxtaposition, if you will, of this generational trauma that Palestinians experience, especially Palestinian children, in addition to the trauma of the profound malnutrition that Palestinian children experience, even before October 7th, but especially accelerated in the current context, a burden is being put on Palestinian children that will have devastating generational consequences that may never completely heal. And recent reports have shown that, for example, that the impact of the trauma on the impact of the famine, if you will, on Palestinian children in terms of their brain development, in terms of their physical development, even if the famine were to be reversed today, will still have long-term chronic consequences. And if you look, as I say, at the juxtaposition of the famine and the nutritional deficits that Palestinian children experience, and put that next to the traumatic exposure, it's a kind of health burden that is going to be devastating at the least and catastrophic, not just for the children, but for their children and their children's children for the foreseeable future. So really, Palestinian children have been exposed to the kind of trauma that no other children anywhere else on the planet has ever experienced. And because of the destruction to the healthcare infrastructure, which has been, again, to put it as an understatement, completely devastating for Palestinians. You know, prior to October 7th, there were 36 pretty well-functioning hospitals throughout the Gaza Strip for 2.3 million individuals. As of today, as we're speaking today, there's not a single completely functioning hospital or clinic anywhere in Gaza. We have a few hospitals in the south, maybe a handful in the middle, very little to none in the north that we're aware of that are able to function with any kind of regularity. That not a single functioning hospital, completely functioning hospital, exists right now. So even if a child, let's say, for example, is injured or suffers a catastrophic injury, there's very little to nothing that the community in Gaza is able to do to minister to those individuals. In fact, we have sent, when I say we, it's a group of us that have been working to send delegations of physicians and nurses to Gaza to help with the humanitarian medical situation on the ground. And the stories that we're hearing now, the stories that we're hearing back from people on the ground are just like shake us to our soul, right? Because we're finding out that surgeons, for example, are having to perform amputations on children, on babies without anesthesia. That the post-wound or post-surgical care is done without antiseptic, without any ability for wound care, without any ability for proper rehabilitation. And that the situation that causes for children, in addition to the psychological trauma, we see that the physical trauma that is being put on children in Gaza right now, the burden is, to put it mildly, is extreme. So what we hope to do in our efforts at Kinder right now, which is really the critical thing right now, because we hear this all the time. Dr. Laila and I hear about this all the time. What can we do? People want to go to Gaza. They want to volunteer their time. They want to do something. But there's something that is much more immediate. And the immediate thing right now is that there has to be a ceasefire. There has to be a resumption of humanitarian aid. There has to be an immediate resumption of full food, water, and medicine into the Gaza Strip. Because without that, those deleterious effects, the deleterious impacts, the horrific impact of both the physical and the psychological traumas that are being inflicted on Palestinian children will only get worse. I think one of the things that we see in Gaza right now, which is something, and I know this is something that Dr. Laila and I know about, and this is prior to October 7th. It's especially painful for us to have to hear about this. In the past, for example, if there was, let's say, a head of household that was killed or imprisoned or taken away from being able to care for their family, we knew that the children in Gaza were able to be connected to extended family to be able to be taken care of in this way. So there was always a connection. The concept of an orphan in Gaza prior to October 7th was a concept that was relatively rare because there was always family members and extended family members that these children could rely on, in the previous 4 wars to October 7th and the blockade. What we're seeing right now, and as I said, it's especially painful and difficult, we're seeing children who are not only witnessing the murder, the devastation, the death of their parents and their siblings, but that death is extended to their extended families. So that when they do come out of the hospital, even if they get the opportunity to do that, their entire families have been wiped from the face of the earth. So the first time that we're aware of, the Palestinian children in those situations are being left bereft and without any connection to a family member, which is extraordinary in the Palestinian context, especially in the context in Gaza, where there are large extended families that have always been there to emotionally take up the slack of children who lose a family member, who lose a parent, and are able to take them in the fold. There is really, and I know Dr. Laila said that, it's hard to kind of wrap your mind around the level of moral depravity that is being done right now and being leveled on and put upon the children of Gaza. There are children who are suffering all over the world because of, either displacement, climate change, political instability. But what's different for Palestinian children in Gaza, this is all man-made. This is not just man-made, but it's deliberate. There are thousands of food trucks, aid trucks, medical supply trucks at the border with Egypt right now that have been waiting to get in for months and months and months. And so the children of the world, who many of whom are suffering, when we look and compare them to the children in Gaza, we see this deliberate attempt to create conditions of famine, starvation, death, psychological trauma that will stay with these children for the rest of their lives and for their children and children's lives. That's the thing that makes it so difficult for us as people of the world with our sense of humanity and our sense of wanting to take care of children who are disadvantaged for whatever reason. We at Kinder, we have this feeling about children globally who are suffering for various reasons. But looking at those children in Gaza and hearing those stories and seeing what they're being forced to do and seeing that they are deliberately being starved to death in front of the world brings all of us especially deep kind of grief and pain. But it allows us to redouble our efforts and commit ourselves through Kinder. And people have to know this about Kinder. We have an extraordinary board. We have a great president, obviously, and Dr. Marayati. We have an extraordinary board. And we are committed to this for the long run. We're going to be in Gaza forever. And you have our commitment about that. And that our commitment will be to provide and do whatever it takes to help these children and their families survive. And we will eventually, through all of our efforts and the help of all of you who are watching and really care about the children of Gaza, our commitment is to help the children of Gaza for as long as it takes. So, Laila, I wonder, one of the things that I would like to get your kind of analysis on is one of the things we're hearing about from the physicians and nurses that we've sent to Gaza and have come back and we've spoken with them is just the devastation to maternal and child care, right? Because there's maybe one maternity hospital that's barely able to function in the south right now, and there are 50,000 women who are pregnant in Gaza. There's no prenatal care, there's no postnatal care. I wonder if you could, if you can, speak a little bit about the impact on maternal and child care in Gaza right now.
Yeah, I think It's hard to talk about like what the data or what the statistics are, because I think there's challenges getting that across the board. We hear the larger numbers of children and women being killed, but you don't hear it sort of on that granular level of how many women have died in childbirth or after childbirth, how many children are stillborn because of the conditions that the mother is experiencing, not getting prenatal care, not having adequate nutrition. I think those numbers may come out at some point in the future, but we do know that it's happening on a daily basis. Or even the most devastating stories of women being brought in after their building was bombed to have an emergency C-section, or what we call a post-mortem C-section, where she's already died or dying, to try to save the baby, and they can't save either one of them. Or they save the baby and not the mother. And now, like you said, you have this orphan child who is a newborn, who needs to be fed. So when we think of ourselves and our lives and what it means to have access to care, imagine taking care of a newborn baby. The mother has died. There's nobody to breastfeed the baby. So what do you need? Formula. Where's the formula coming from? Who's bringing it in? What's the situation with the water? How about even diapers? Just basic cleanliness. There's so many layers of this atrocity inflicted on everybody in society. And when you start to look specifically at one group, that is pregnant women, you can imagine anybody who's needed any service for any condition, whether she's having a miscarriage, or she's pregnant and can't get care, or giving birth in a chair in a waiting room in a hospital. We take so much for granted that, oh, I'll get an epidural so I don't have to experience pain. Oh, I'll have a C-section with anesthesia. When you stop and think that this is actually happening with intention, it should give everybody pause. But in terms of understanding what the scale is and what the numbers are, that I'm sure that will come out later. But there's much more than we can even imagine, because all we know is what we know. And so for all those bodies that are buried under the rubble, you've seen when they went into El Shifa after the three-week siege, and they found bodies lying in the streets, bodies been run over by bulldozers. There's so much, and by now, for people who were killed in other attacks, the bodies probably have decomposed to the extent that they will never be retrieved. Even in my own family, recently, one of our relatives, 5 members of his family were killed. They couldn't go to retrieve the bodies to bury them. So this is happening all over the place. There's so much that we don't know, but what we do know is just, I can't think of a word to describe it, honestly. I've worked in low resource settings. I have worked in trauma centers. I know what the worst case scenario looks like for a woman who could be dying from hemorrhage or from an eclamptic seizure. I know that I can't save her if I don't have resources, if I don't have medications, if I don't have blood products. But one thing that really struck me listening to a story being told of a woman who was giving birth to her first child. She did have a hemorrhage. They did transfuse her. The people of Gaza are donating their own blood to help each other. Who talks about that? Under these worst, horrible circumstances, they are still giving of themselves, donating their blood. This saved this woman's life so that she could be there to take care of her newborn baby, because I have seen people bleed to death, and it is real. But it shouldn't happen anywhere in the world right now with all of the resources that we have, especially in a place like the Gaza Strip, where you have very qualified medical professionals, sophisticated teams, maternity wards, taking advantage of everything they had to be able to save lives and to protect these individuals and do the best they could. And I'm sure, I know if Dr. Matz were here, he would talk about the type of services that were offered in the medical system throughout Gaza, having witnessed it on a very regular basis. So they know what to do, but they can't do what they know. So that makes it even harder. So I think that this is a very vulnerable population. And I think you can really when you stop to think of yourselves and when you've been ill or had any kind of problem and not being able to get any care, then you can start to think about and maybe empathize with what the Palestinians in Gaza are going through. So I think that's sort of what my thoughts on that.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Dr. Laila. And I'll just kind of jump in and say a little bit about my experience, because I've actually spent quite a bit of time at Al-Shifa Hospital. When I've gone to Gaza, for example, I stay in a place that's near the hospital, and I've spent quite a bit of time. And I think what's hard for people to fully appreciate and understand about Al-Shifa Hospital, it's the crown jewel of medical healthcare delivery, not just in Gaza. I mean, I know enough about healthcare services in Palestine in general, and maybe my colleagues in the West Bank and Jerusalem, may hem and haw a little bit, but I think I feel safe in saying that prior to the destruction of Al-Shifa Hospital, it was considered among the jewels of the healthcare system for all of Palestine. It was an extraordinary hospital with 700 beds, with clinics, not just for primary care, but also for secondary care, and in some cases, tertiary care. So they had the full complement of medical and surgical services, rehabilitation services, including mental health services, and including follow-up care in outpatient clinics. And can we really, Dr. Laila, can we really wrap our minds around the fact and the reality that that hospital has been deliberately targeted and destroyed? And not just once, because early on the hospital was targeted. The civilians who were in the courtyard of the Al-Shifa Hospital, thousands were staying because they had the belief and the expectation and the understanding that being in a hospital grounds would be safe, right? And the first wave of attacks on Shifa were devastating and destroyed. And, NICU babies were dying because there was no power that was going to the incubators. Hundreds of patients were killed. Physicians were killed. Nurses were killed. Healthcare workers were killed or arrested and tortured. And it created this kind of destruction of the healthcare infrastructure. And then just last week, they did it again. The Israeli military did it again. It wasn't enough that they destroyed and incapacitated the hospital the first time. Last week, they went in a second time and laid waste to this extraordinary healthcare hospital, clinic, and service. So it's devastating. I mean, I don't think there's any way to talk about it.
I think it reflects, a larger purpose, if you will, about what is the point of completely and utterly destroying, like you said, the most important healthcare institution in the Gaza Strip as a source of referral, to completely destroy 26 out of 36 hospitals. What's happening here? To utterly destroy it. It's one thing if you're have tactics of war, and we're not getting into all of the politics here, but to me, there's something important and symbolic about the targeting of that. Like you said, it was the crown jewel. It was sophisticated. People came from all over the world to work with Palestinians there. The number of people who got prostheses, because this idea of amputations has been ongoing, with specific targeting of Palestinians, shooting them in the legs during the Great March of Return. And so they've figured out how to get prosthetic limbs. And you see all kinds of images of these young people moving and doing what they have to do. And not to mention the attacks on the educational institutions. And Israeli soldiers themselves showing pictures of them blowing up entire complexes of a whole university. Why do you have to destroy all of it? What is going on here? So targeting of education, targeting of healthcare system in this manner that is disproportionate and excessive, as we have always said, But even beyond those words, there's not a word that I can even think of. But I do believe that, again, we haven't talked about the children in the schools. Our work has been with children in schools to help provide nutritious meals, to provide other forms of support, clean drinking water, outside services for kids who are struggling in school. There's no school. These children have not been in school for 6 months. And again, families, people watching, you have children, imagine what that would look like in your own household. So to their credit, the Palestinian educators in the camps in Rafah are having makeshift schools.
Right.
They're taking their time to find a way to educate children, to teach them, to give them, activities to engage in, to help them not lose momentum on this such an important time in their life. So these are young people who were about to graduate from college or medical school, completely gone. There's just the younger children who may have just been starting to learn how to read and write. What is that? And on top of the layers you talked about, Jess, of the PTSD and what have you, and just the psychological trauma, what does it mean for children to be in an educational vacuum for 6 months, a year, or longer? For their own development, educationally, intellectually, for their future jobs, the effect, like you said, is going to be for a long time and multi-generational, but that's another area that has to be addressed. And I would argue that as an American physician working in a university-based system, I believe that, in addition to the work we're doing at Kinder, these larger institutions among healthcare as well as education in places like the United States should be at the forefront for rebuilding these spaces in Gaza when this is over. But like you said, getting back to the point of how people can be involved and what they can do, and the work that KinderUSA is doing, we will never abandon Gaza. We continue to provide support also for children in Jerusalem, the West Bank, the refugee camps in Lebanon. Every opportunity we have to be present, to build those relationships is what we will do. And for now, the focus is on in getting food to the people who are hungry, which thankfully we've been able to do. Earlier on during this conflict, we also were able to procure jackets and shoes for children. If you recall, this has happened during the winter. It was very cold. And so we were able to provide those resources as well. So that's what we'll continue to do. And in order for people not to feel a sense of hopelessness, right, we must always have hope and belief. People will live to see another day. We have no idea what they're capable of. Like I told you, they're out giving blood to each other in order to survive this terrible ordeal. And they will be an example to all of us. So we have to do our part to continue to support, to amplify their voices, to get the word out, to demand an immediate ceasefire, and to then start immediately on rebuilding Gaza with the Palestinian people there leading the way they want it to be done, not have it imposed from somewhere else on how it should be done.
Thank you so much. That crown jewel that you were describing was today described by the director of the World Health Organization as an empty shell with human graves. So this is the level of destruction. Another note that, when you were talking, Dr. Al-Marayati, about the children trying to learn in the camps and, teachers trying to teach, the mind goes to the images of the post-Nakba, when Palestinians, the first thing they did following the Nakba and the destruction was actually to establish schools in the refugee camps. And this, gives us an idea of how resilient and resistant these people are, and so how important the work of organizations like KinderUSA is going to be. And I would move quickly because we are receiving so many questions for you. So I would move quickly to some questions. There is this one from Lena saying, as a civilian, what more can I do to educate my community and representatives about the effects of war trauma on children? For both of you, of course.
Go ahead, Jess.
Okay. Thank you, Lena, for that question. I think it's incredibly important. And I just want to give it a little context because, as Dr. Laila said, sometimes when we see after 6 months, the continuation of this catastrophe that's being put deliberately on Palestinians in Gaza, we sometimes feel like, well, what are we doing? Are we doing enough? But I will say to every one of you that has signed a petition, that has gone to a demonstration, that has called your elected representative, it is making a difference. And not that I really pay much attention to what the New York Times says, but they actually published an article in the Times today about the impact that these demonstrations and the Palestine Solidarity Movement is having on elected officials. And everyone now believes that it's changing the needle, changing the direction of the needle, and that people are almost universally now fed up with politicians who refuse to call for a ceasefire and do something about what's happening. So all of you need to know that whether you're going to a protest or signing a petition or whatever you're doing, every single thing that you're doing does make a difference. It does make a difference. Now, in terms of how do we get the information out there, there are a lot of good sources of information about the impact of war on children. One of the best places that I've seen is some of the reports coming from Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders. They have people on the ground right now, and they've been giving updates about what the impact on the destruction of the healthcare infrastructure is having on children, on women, on the communities in Gaza. So check out Médecins Sans Frontières. The second group, which has actually been putting out a lot of really important information, is the WHO. Has, in fact, because they are actively engaged with physicians and healthcare workers in Gaza still, they've been able to put out some really important information. And why I like your question, Lena, is because when you go speak to elected officials or your neighbors or to people who may not fully understand what's happening in Gaza, having reliable, good information and data is really important. So I am a big fan. I don't know what you think, Laila, but I'm a big fan of developing relationships with people and talking about Palestine and about Gaza, and developing relationships with our colleagues, our peers, our friends, and our neighbors. It's not a one and done kind of thing. I mean, we have to develop relationships with people in such a way that we can continue to have the discussion that what is happening in Gaza right now is not just unacceptable, it's morally wrong. And it's not just what's happened since October 7th, it's what's been happening in Gaza and Palestine since 1948, and continue to have that. So, Lena, go out there, get the information, do what you need to do, have that conversation. But I don't know, Laila, what do you think?
I agree. I think two other resources for information about children is UNICEF, or on the ground in Gaza, as well as Defense for Children International, DCI. They have some good documents that can be used. I think sometimes it's overwhelming when you get some of these statistics, sometimes telling stories. If you know, there are children with Instagram pages now.
Right.
That we are all following. Little Lama Jamous, for example, she identifies herself as the youngest reporter, member of the press in Gaza. Watching their stories, sharing those on social media is very important. And this is how we know truly what's happening, is because of the individuals in Gaza, when they can get cell service or internet, are putting images and stories out of themselves, of their community, of what's happening. This has been a game changer since they have not allowed any international journalists to come into Gaza.
Right.
So we truly have relied on them. And I think sometimes getting those personal stories, individual, if you find children even on Instagram or social media, not in an exploitative way, but say they're speaking for themselves, they're telling their story, sharing those, humanizing the people of Gaza, because this campaign has been successful for two reasons. Number one, The effort to dehumanize us as Palestinians that has been going on for 75 years has culminated in this moment that allowed the world to sit and watch for the last 6 months. And the second one is fear, because they have imposed a sense of fear on anybody who speaks out or criticizes it will be labeled as anti-Semitic or what have you. And so everyone is afraid. So those two elements have made it possible for us to get where we are. So to counter that, we have to challenge that and not be afraid, have courage, because we care about human beings. And that's the main thing that we are all about here. This is humanity. And secondly, to humanize the Palestinians and tell their stories. And some of these kids on social media tell their own story better than we can. And let that be the tool that you use to talk to others about Gaza.
Absolutely. This is so important. We have Erin Wade asking the name of Lama, I suppose.
Yeah.
Her name is Lama Jamus, and she's a 9-year-old. And, you know, it's really heartbreaking to see her reports from Gaza these days. Another question they're asking us, can you also tell us a little bit about Kinder's field partners and beneficiaries? Who are they and how are they doing? People are very curious about that. They want to understand what is really going on in Gaza. Of course, it's very difficult for everybody to know the details, but what do we know?
Yeah, I mean, we have been working with Beit Lahia Foundation for over 10 years, mainly, like I said, with the Farmers Project during Ramadan. That is who is really doing the bulk of the distribution of aid to the people in the north and the south. The women's cooperatives that we have worked with, I believe, are probably not active right now, may have been displaced themselves, but they had a whole system set up that would enable them to provide food in the schools or food to the families, especially during Ramadan. But our main partner is the Beit Lahia Foundation team that is on the ground, has been there. They're Palestinians from Beit Lahia in the north and have been displaced themselves, but are going back to the north in order to distribute these meals. And they do know, obviously, the community there because they're a part of it. So hopefully that answers that question. As far as identifying individuals and who is in need, it's
everybody.
Walking the streets, it's door to door. It's a small community in general. So you know somebody who knows somebody who knows who else is in need. And this is a family with 6 children and both parents. That's how the word gets around. Historically, you could use the registry from the Ministry of Social Services, but that's not available right now. So it really is just on the ground information that they're getting in order to figure out whom to help.
Yeah, and if I can just jump in for a second, there are a lot, and Laila said this earlier, there are a lot of organizations, big NGOs that are trying or have tried to provide these kinds of support services on the ground in Gaza. And the one thing that is an advantage of KinderUSA and our organization is that we've been there for a very long time. We are connected to the community. The people that work for Kinder are part of the community. And that's one of the reasons why we feel so committed to doing this kind of work, because we have on the ground connections with the communities in Gaza to be able to continue to provide, whatever support, mostly food support as we've been talking about, because that's really the thing right now that we're all deeply preoccupied with. When we see the pictures of famine, children, Palestinian children, literally starving to death in the 21st century, our focus right now is just doing whatever we can do to make sure that there's enough food to eat right now.
We also have staff members, and just for their safety, obviously I won't say anybody's name, but who were based in Gaza City, were forced out early on during this, just having to take care of themselves, their family, still trying to do their part, working with us to identify, especially this question of figuring out who's in the greatest need, which communities. There's people who aren't in tents, who aren't in camps, and who may just be in the streets, or who are trying to live in the shell of their former home, that they will find and determine that they need help. So we do have our staff as well as our partner at this time, and And it's day to day, week to week, doing the best they can to help in the way that they can, and to maintain their safety, because we don't want them to be in harm's way. You know, and they have to look out for themselves. And if they decided today that they couldn't do this anymore because it's not safe, who could blame them? For any aid worker, over 200 aid workers have been killed in Gaza already. As you said, the medical professionals, educators, a lot of people. And so for anybody who's trying to get themselves and their family to safety, all we can say is, how can we help? I mean, that's really what our obligation is right now. Before we go on to the next question, I also want to take a moment to acknowledge the work of our dedicated executive director, Dalal Mohammed, who's been doing this work for these 20 years. It's through her efforts and connections with our teams on the ground in Gaza that we're able to get anything done at all. And we really appreciate her commitment and compassion for the children of Gaza. So I think that's a really important part of why we're doing what we're doing.
Thank you, Dalal.
Thank you, Dalal, and thank to all of you. Our panelists offered really a wealth of expertise and knowledge, which allowed us to understand more about the challenges on the ground of humanitarian aid in Gaza. I want to extend a warm thank you to our guests, and I urge each of you to reflect on these insights shared by our panelists. And I also invite you to visit the KinderUSA website and our social media to gain further understanding of KinderUSA impactful work. Thank you, everybody, for your attention and participation in this discussion. And thank you very much again to our guests.
Could I add one more thing? I know Dr. Mad sends his regrets that he couldn't join us. He had an emergency that he had to take care of. He has been a tried and true supporter of KinderUSA for many years, and we all are grateful to him for his courage and his voice of conscience, and really his fierce support and defense of the people of Gaza, everything that he's done. So I'm sure he will appear in other places in the coming weeks.
He will.
But he is a true friend, a dear friend of KinderUSA. We're so grateful for everything he has done and is doing. And I want to thank you, Ramona, for putting this together, and my friend and colleague, Dr. Jess, for being on this panel for us. And everybody who participated, we're so grateful that you could join us today.
Thank you very much. Thank you.